Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to the Monday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. It is Monday, the 13th day of July, and it is a pleasure, and I mean that, a pleasure to be back live with our listening audience and an opportunity once again to interact with those who participate actively in our, as Bob referred to it, ongoing conversation. I got so excited when I heard Bob doing that introduction to the program, because as those of you who listen regularly know, we have been unable to do live broadcasts now for a week. The last live broadcast we did was a week ago last Wednesday. And so, Bob was out of town for a week, and we were unable to produce the program. And so we've had to rely on archived program that are available, by the way, at the White Rose website. That's whiterose.org. And we have our archived programs there listed by date. Again, thank you. Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution. It is a pleasure to be back with you. If I appear a little bit nervous, it's because I am. I always do that. We do our regular programming on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays, as many of you know. And then we have a 5-day hiatus before we come back live again the following Monday. So I always have a little bit of angst over the weekend as I prepare for a new week of programs. But now we're in a situation where we didn't have a full week last week, so it's been almost 2 weeks. So if I do appear a little bit nervous, I'm pretty sure, at least I'm banking on this, that the material and the information and the conversation itself will overcome any sense of nervousness that I might have. We, as you know, we have a phone number, and we would love to hear from those of you out there on some of the issues that we are and will be talking about. Let me point out that the issue on the table today, I believe, will probably take up the better part of our full 2-hour program today. And what I'd like to do is spend some time on the Greek financial crisis. The situation that has been going on in Greece over the last 10 days to 2 weeks. As you know, it was on a Saturday night a full week ago that the Greek electorate voted no. 61% of the Greek voting public voted no to the terms of creditors that were being demanded of Greece and of the Greece government. And ultimately, that put the ball back in the court of the Western powers, of the International Monetary Fund, the Central European Bank, and some of the major creditors, principally Germany and France. And as you know, this has been getting a lot of attention nationally and internationally. It's all over the media. But the interesting thing is that as I've talked to people over the last week, and again, I've been pulling a lot of this stuff together now for the better part of a week. And one of the things that I've noticed is that the more information I collect, the more I recognize how complicated, how extremely complex this whole issue is. So basically, that I think has that issue and the seriousness of it has pretty much forced it onto our front burner here at the Virtual Center. So I'd like to devote our time today to that particular issue. Those of you who listen regularly will recall that in our last broadcast, which was almost 2 weeks ago, we talked about looking at some detail in the Supreme Court's decisions affecting the Affordable Care Act and then, of course, the same-sex marriage decision, what we had agreed on is that we would start looking at some of the, not only the majority opinions in some detail, but also some of the dissenting opinions as well. We will do that in our future programs. There's no question. But I really believe that the timing of this particular situation that is going on in Greece is so important, and the issues are so incredibly relevant for all of us, that it would almost be a gross mistake to push this off and leave it for another day. I think the more we can take this on and get into it and weigh the different potentialities and areas where the issues become extremely relevant, the more we can do that, it seems to me, the better off all of us will be, because the issue continues to unfold. As you know, after an all-night meeting between representatives of the 19 creditor nations in the Eurozone and Greece, they did work out some sort of a deal in order to avoid total bankruptcy on the part of Greece, with the threat that Greece would indeed pull out of the European of the Eurozone and basically go back to its own form of currency, the drachma, which was the official currency of the Greek nation until it joined the European nations in the 90s, in the 1990s. We do have a phone number. We would love to hear from you. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. That's 304-663-4676. On your keypad, 4676 translates into HORN, H-O-R-N. And, of course, that's a reminder that we are brought to you on the Head On Radio Network, affectionately known as the Horn. That's the network that has been kind enough to make our programs possible on a regular basis. And for those of you out there who might be tuning in for the first time, let me tell you that we have been engaged in this effort with the Virtual Center now as of the 11th of July, which was basically this past Friday. We've been doing, I believe, 28 months of broadcasting here at the Virtual Center. So it looks like I find that difficult to believe, because when we began to do these programs, it never dawned on me that we would have enough information, enough material to keep us on the air for that long. And lo and behold, the more we do, the more we begin to realize that we've barely scratched the surface, so to speak. So I'm guessing that even though we've been on for quite a while, it looks like, Lord willing, we'll be on for quite a while longer. At least I certainly do hope so. So again, I encourage you to do all you can to support the Head On Radio Network. As you know, we do no paid advertising. Nobody's contributing to keep us on the air. Most of the people that are engaged at the Head On Radio Network are doing it as a labor of love. There are no salaries involved. And basically, we stay on the air because the people who listen to us and interact with us help us financially. And so I don't want to spend a lot of time emphasizing that, but I do encourage you to, if you find that you have a few spare dollars that you would like to do something very positive with, I invite you to stay with us for a while here at the Virtual Center and listen to other programming on the Head On Radio Network, with the idea that if you do believe that this is something that is as important as we believe it is, then I think that you would be hard-pressed to find a more worthwhile repository, if you will, for your generosity. Again, our phone number, if you would like to participate in our program, is area code 304-663-4676. A number of our listeners are, for understandable reasons, a little bit uncomfortable, perhaps, to get on the air and voice their opinions over the phone, and I understand that. If you call the 4676 number, you will get into our Head-On Radio Network studios. Bob Kincaid will probably be there answering the phone. He's there most of the time, and he will basically be the one that answers the phone, and then he will get you on the air, and we will give you an opportunity to weigh in on some of the issues and some of the controversies that we've been talking about. A lot of people are reluctant to do that. Our audience is vast. The caliber of people who are interacting with us and have been interacting with us for some time is incredible. We have calls and emails from around the world, and many people are a little bit uncomfortable getting on the air, and they feel much more comfortable sharing their ideas via email. And we welcome those. I welcome those. And so I'm going to give you my email address and encourage you that if you would like to offer a suggestion, an idea, a question, a concern related to our program, then I would love to hear it, and I promise you that I will do the very best I can to respond in kind to every substantive email we receive. My email address is WAObrien, OBRIEN 906 @gmail.com. That's WAObrien, OBRIEN 906 @gmail.com. I realize that I'm taking a little bit more time than normal today in our introduction. I think that's in part because it's been a while since we've been together. But also there's a kind of a new wrinkle in my life that I'd like to share with our listening audience here at the very outset. During the week that we were not on the air live this past week, I took the monumental step for me and developed a Facebook page. I developed a personal one. That's the one where you basically react personally with your friends. But I also developed a page for the Virtual Center. And so I'm asking you to react to that page and react to some of the things on it. I'm using it as an opportunity to post political positions, articles, things that I've written, whatever. And again, it's only 4 or 5 days old, so we can make improvements as we go. The center web page or Facebook page is just that. It is on Facebook. It is just all you have to do is type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will get the page. I invite you to do that. And in Facebook language, I invite you to like it. And, of course, that's one of the things many of you will know. I never really understood when all these radio programs and TV programs are on, and they'll say, like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter, and I never had any idea. I didn't have any idea what that meant. Well, the fact of the matter is, like us on Facebook is the language where you actually connect on a permanent basis with a particular with the program, and give in this case me an opportunity to respond to your comments. If you have one, there's a comment place there. There's a place that you can agree or disagree. There's a place where you can read position papers on some of the issues we've dealt with and some of the issues we continue to raise here at the Virtual Center. Let me again emphasize, and I'm assuming that because of the existence of the Facebook page over the last week, it's entirely possible that we have listeners out there who are tuning in for the very first time. At least I hope so, because I have done my best to publicize the program on Facebook, tell them the address, the headonradionetwork.com, where our program is broadcast, the hours, the 1 to 3, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday format that we develop, all of that. So I am I'm assuming that there might be a few listeners out there that we haven't had before, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to go through a little bit more detail than normal at the beginning on some of the things that we're about here at the Virtual Center. I do encourage you to interact with me through the Facebook page. I hope you will like it. I invite you to like it, and I invite you to make comments that you feel would be very appropriate. It's probably something that many of you do all the time. It is something that I have spent a long time avoiding, very honestly, for a lot of reasons. Some of them personal, some of them philosophical. I've been a little bit reluctant because I have known so many situations where people have revealed more information about themselves on Facebook than they should have, and have found themselves in some sort of trouble as a result. I hear the news reports as well as you do that people will oftentimes announce on Facebook that they'll be leaving for a week or going on vacation for a week and won't be home, and their homes are robbed and everything else. I mean, I see all of that. And so for a long time, I've shied away. But I really believe the more we can improve and enhance and expand our listener base and our number of participants here at the Virtual Center, the more we can expand the base of supporters of the Head On Radio Network, the stronger and more viable our message will become. So I do invite you to like the Facebook page. I invite you to take advantage of the phone number to call in live on our program. I invite you to send an email to me personally at waobrien906@gmail.com. We would love to interact with you. This is not in any way a traditional talk radio program that you hear on terrestrial radio in your automobile or everything else. We're not going to shut you off because we don't agree with your point of view. We're not going to limit you to a minute or 15 seconds or anything like that. We do not deal in an approach to learning and understanding which is defined by bullets and by a stopwatch. We would love to give you as much time as you need to make your point. And as many of our regular listeners know, we have had calls from overseas where the caller has been on for an hour and 15 minutes because we've been talking about an issue that's that involved and that deep. That's what we're about. We're not about covering an amount of material. We're about covering material that we believe is relevant to our nation, to the Republic, to the vision and the ideals of America's founders, and to an understanding of the necessity of an active, responsible citizenry in order for the potential of this republic to be fulfilled. It is not an accident that we have entitled our program the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We live in an age where too many people are in the business of convincing citizens that all that matters in this republic are the rights, your rights as citizens. Not often enough is an effort made to understand the balance between rights and responsibilities. Consequently, we have too many people in our society, we believe, that believe that their rights, their freedom, takes precedence over everything else. The republic, their neighbors, the rights of others, everything else. So what we're about here at the Virtual Center is arriving through conversation and dialogue, not through browbeating, not through brainwashing or whatever, but looking at the founders, looking at what the founders said, spoke, and believed about the ideals and the visions that they saw and they hoped to create for this nation, for this republic. Our effort then is to go back to the founders' focusing principally on sources in order to better understand the fundamental principles on which this republic is founded. And part of those principles, without doubt, without question, are the responsibilities of an active citizenry. Not a citizenry that merely votes, but a citizenry that remains informed and involved. As Thomas Jefferson said, if for one time citizens cease to be vigilant and cease to watch carefully what we do as representatives, as judges, as legislators, as governors, we will become wolves unless the people keep us in line. Part of civic responsibility in this republic is for citizens to remain vigilant in order to fulfill the role of civic responsibility defined by and explained by the founders. And that's what we're about. Understanding the Constitution, understanding the founders, understanding the role of the Supreme Court in some of these momentous decisions that the court is reaching, which are reinterpreting the meaning and the essence of the frame of government under which we all live. This is not a program based on indoctrination, on opinion necessarily, on ideology. It is a program that seeks understanding and conversation. Our goal is to educate, not to convince. We are, excuse me, we aim to basically promote the issue of an educated citizenry, not a group of followers who believe but do not understand. That's what we're about. So in a sense then, our topic for today, which is the situation going on in Greece, that has been going on in Greece now for the last couple of weeks, we're talking about potentially getting into a level of depth into some of these issues that will raise all sorts of possibilities. Our job is not to convince anyone which of these possibilities is the right one or the preferred one. Our job is to provide the information, and together with our participants, with our listeners, to try to understand and act accordingly as educated citizens in this republic. That's what we're about. We thank you for tuning in. We invite you to join us on a regular basis. We invite you to participate actively in our program, whether it's through my email address, whether it's through our phone call-in line, whether it's through our new Facebook page. However you would like to be heard, we would love to hear from you. With that, let's make an effort to get into one of the most complex issues that I think all of us have been witness to for some time. We've been through, in previous months here, a number of Supreme Court decisions and dissents. And we've even agreed that some of these things, the reasoning on some of these decisions and some of these dissents, is so complex that sometimes we wonder about the people who wrote them, who wrote these particular position papers. I think that's what we're beginning to see with the Greek situation. There's much more involved here than defaulting, than Greece defaulting in its debt obligations to its creditors. That's the issue. That's the issue under debate. But why that issue is significant, what the vote that the Greek people took a week ago Saturday when they went to the polls, and 61% of them voted no on the terms being demanded by creditors. What did that no vote mean? What is the significance of this particular issue? Not only to the European creditors, not even just to Europe, to us. One of the facts that I think all of us need to understand is that throughout all of this, one of the agencies directly involved is the International Monetary Fund, usually referred to as the IMF. It's important to recognize that the majority of board members at the IMF are Americans. U.S. citizens control the International Monetary Fund. So the United States potentially has a significant say in what happens there. There are some people out there, naturally, who will say that's part of America's problem. We want to have a say in everybody else's business. Maybe we ought to just get these people off the board of the IMF, of the International Monetary Fund, pull them back, and basically let Europeans handle their own issues. Most of us are aware that the world we live in today doesn't quite work that way anymore. That may have been a dream one time. And I say that very, very advisedly, because I believe even at the one time it was a dream, it was just that. Because from the very beginning, the very creation of this nation, which began with the establishment of 13 British colonies, is a product of the Western world's need to expand. It stands to reason, then, that a nation that's born as part of international expansion ever believed, that it could pull back and decide not to be involved with the world anymore. We know throughout our history that there have been those movements. We know that there was a significant movement or a significant element that did not want President Roosevelt to go into World War II. There was even a theory that Roosevelt intentionally set up Pearl Harbor in order to entice Japan to declare war on us so that we could declare war on her. Because there was so much pressure on this government from isolationists who wanted to just pull back and let Japan have its way in the Far East and let Germany and Italy and the Soviets work it out on the continent of Europe and on the continent of Asia. Roosevelt knew we couldn't do that. Most of us understand that we couldn't do that. So therefore, this idea that we should just disengage from international affairs, and that would make our lives so much simpler. It sounds good, but most of us know that it's not going to work that way. So I think that's the first thing on this situation, is that we're dealing with a situation in Greece which has ramifications and implications for the entire world. It's not something that we can afford to ignore, because it will directly affect us in many, many different ways. That's one thing. The other thing, another piece of information, I think that helps, at least at the beginning on understanding this, is to recognize that the Greek economy is extremely small in comparison to the other members of the Eurozone, the other nations that have adopted the euro as their common currency. There are 19 of those, 19 nations. These were the nations that were represented during the negotiations, the all-night negotiations that just broke up this morning. Some of the numbers that we see suggest that the Greek economy is around or even less than 2% of the total economy of that group. So in other words, there's no way that whatever Greece does, the economy of the entire Eurozone, the European Union, as it were, is going to be seriously threatened. At least not from directly what Greece does. But there's an awful lot of literature. We see it here, there, and everywhere. David Ignatius wrote a very solid piece in the Washington Post several days ago on this. And he pointed out that the issue, because of the size of Greece's economy in relationship to the organization as a whole, is so small that the real issue on the table here is more political than it is economic. This position argues, Ignatius and many other people argue, that the real issue here is what other members of the Eurozone do based on what Greece does or is allowed to do. Greece has allowed itself, that's a very, very loaded statement. It's not clear that Greece has any control over this, or at least as much control as her creditors are trying to assign to her. But the fact of the matter is, the nation of Greece encumbered an incredibly huge debt, given the size of her economy. Her economy, as it is currently constructed, is in a position where it can't grow itself out of the debt mess. It's incurred more debt than it can possibly repay. But that's still an infinitesimal amount of debt in relationship to the entire economic worth of the total organization. So economically, the threat is a bit minimal. However, there are other nations in this organization. The ones that are most frequently mentioned: Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, whose economies are significantly larger than Greece's, who are also mired in incredibly deep debt within this organization. And it's very clear that they are watching very carefully the situation with Greece. Because what Greece does, or what Greece is allowed to do, is probably going to determine what they do. Many people have argued, for example, that the only thing that the European creditors can do is to forgive a significant portion of this debt because Greece can't pay it, and Greece will go down the tube trying to. Harold, I believe it's Harold Meyerson. Let me check my sources here. Harold Meyerson, who writes regularly for the Washington Post, on the 9th of July, which was last Thursday, wrote a piece in the Washington Post entitled, "Germany Failed to Learn from Its Own History and Greece is Paying the Price." Because what Meyerson reminds us is that in 1953, Germany's creditors forgave 1/2 of that nation's debt because it looked like Germany's economy was going under. Remember, Germany had been part of the division during World War II. And we had the division between West Germany and East Germany. And West Germany was struggling. There's no question that the other nations of the West, given the imposing influence of the Soviet Union, the nations of the West would determine that West Germany's economy make it, that West Germany not go under, that nation not fail. So in 1953, Germany's creditors forgave 50% of the debt that nation owed in order that nation could continue to exist. And so many people are saying, Germany seems to be, Angela Merkel seems to be holding the Greeks' feet to the fire, so to speak, over this debt. It would seem that Germany ought to look at its own history and ought to recognize that when it was in the same kind of situation that Greece is in, her creditors came to her aid by forgiving 50% of the debt. All of us learned in history, in high school, in school, when we were studying the end of World War I and the events leading to World War II. All of us remember that many of the Allied nations forgave the World War I debt of Germany because many people recognized that the incredible situation that Germany found itself in after World War I precipitated World War II. It brought Adolf Hitler to power. After World War II, when many nations, the Western nations, saw that, they began to realize the best thing we can do is not insist that Germany repay these horrendous reparations that Germany was forced to sign in the Peace of Versailles in 1919. Many people who know that's in all the textbooks. The fact that Allied nation after Allied nation was willing to step forward and forgive Germany's World War I war debt. Harold Meyerson points out that as the Great Depression descended on Germany in 1930, the German government, which was made up of a coalition of centrist parties headed by Chancellor Heinrich Brüning, was engaged in the same kind of austerity program that Greece is being forced to participate in now. Austerity meaning cut costs, cut expenses, reduce costs, reduce staff, reduce public employees, lower pensions, lower education costs, lower health care costs. In other words, the way to deal with the debt is to stop spending. That's the austerity package that the Greeks are being forced to agree to. Well, that is the same kind of austerity package that the members of the coalition that ruled Germany in 1930 were engaged in. An effort to balance Germany's budget in order to convince its creditors, many of whom were receiving the high reparations that Germany was forced to pay after World War I, these German partners were determined to show that Germany was a responsible debtor. And so therefore they operated on the assumption that the best thing they could do is balance the budget. That would send a message to their creditors that we're doing everything we can to meet our world international obligations. Of course, as Germany tightened the screws economically on its economy, and people found themselves out of work, and unemployment increased and all the rest of it, what this austerity program was doing was creating an environment which allowed Adolf Hitler and the Nazis to establish a forum and to build a movement that brought us directly into World War II. Many of those covering the Greek story remind us that there is a neo-Nazi party called the Golden Dawn that is beginning to get quite a bit of visibility in Greece. In other words, extreme nationalists who are looking at what the international creditor market is doing to Greece and are saying to the Greece people, they're going to make us slaves. We need to stand up for the history and the traditions and the viability of the nation of Greece. And so basically it's encouraging people who see themselves on the wrong end of everything that's happening in Greece to abandon their political loyalties and to join this neo-nationalist party called the Golden Dawn, which is the same kind of party that was in Germany in the early 1930s, headed by Adolf Hitler. The same kind of party that existed in Italy in the early 1920s, associated with the name of Benito Mussolini. That's the kind of situation that is bubbling up in the background as we watch and read about this situation that is ongoing over the Greek debt. And of course, we would be remiss if we didn't recognize that the same perspective, the same issues are underway here in the United States. We know as the degree of alienation and separation and polarization that exists in our nation between progressives or liberals and conservatives, between Democrats and Republicans, is making it more and more difficult to get anything positive through Congress. Congress has become, in the eyes of many people, dysfunctional. Congress can't seem to get anything passed. The filibuster has become a tool of choice in the United States Senate to a degree that it never was before. What's happening in Washington is not the passage of legislation, but concerted efforts to make sure that nothing passes, that the government shuts down. What are the demands of the extreme right? Austerity. A reduction of taxes for the rich, a reduction of taxes for business because they create jobs. Coupled with a reduction in salary, a reduction in wages, a reduction in benefits, a reduction in food stamps, a reduction in education costs, a commitment to the idea of a balanced budget. This is our austerity program. And we are conducting our politics on the very same issues that we are seeing play out in the Greek debt situation. What an educational opportunity for all of us as citizens. We can watch what's happening in Greece, and we can begin to really better understand what's happening here. Or, on the other side of the coin, if we believe that we really do understand somewhat the issues that are occurring here, we can take that knowledge, that understanding, and transfer it overseas in order to get a better grasp of what's happening in Greece. The fact of the matter is, the issues on the table there, the issues at play, are the issues that the entire world is dealing with, or will soon deal with, or had better start dealing with. We spent, I'd say, a couple of weeks here at the Virtual Center recently on Pope Francis's encyclical Laudate Si. And we spent quite a bit of time dealing with the Pope's position on the environment, the Pope's position on climate, and the extent to which the Pope is correct in his reliance on hard science, which is telling us that the weather extremes we are seeing all over the earth are largely human-generated, man-generated, man-made. We have seen, on the contrary, the efforts of the doubters to contest that science and to challenge those who support that science. But many of us also will recall that the Pope did not limit his discussion in his encyclical to climate alone. Rather, the Pope got into the economy that was driving man's abuse of the earth, the polluting of its air and water. What has made the Pope's encyclical so controversial here in America and around the world is the position the Pope has taken on the direction and the assumptions of international capitalism. He is asking people to rethink the assumptions which have driven their attitudes towards work, towards money, towards investment, towards future planning, all of it. All of it. Many of you are aware, of course, that right now the Pope is in Latin America. He has been there for several days. I just wanted to share with you this past Thursday, in a speech delivered in Bolivia, Pope Francis took on many of the same issues. And I have not highlighted this entire speech, but I've just taken a portion of it for our purposes today. The Pope, according to the press, the Pope drew cheers when he called on activists and others to change the social order. The Pope said, quote, "I would even say that the future of humanity is in great measure in your own hands. Through your ability to organize and carry out creative alternatives, through your daily efforts to ensure the 3 L's, labor, lodging, land, unquote. The Pope repeated the condemnation of the economic system that he had laid out in his encyclical a few weeks earlier. He criticized, quote, certain free trade treaties, and, quote, and this is very relevant to what we're talking about here, quote, austerity which always tightened the belt of workers and the poor. Clearly a reference to what's going on in Greece. By definition, what the Pope is saying is that the international economy we all live under, in its push for austerity budgets, in its push for balancing budgets, is always tightening the screws on the poor and on working people. Let me make this point. We're moving towards the top of our first hour. It is 51 minutes after the hour, so we've got about 6 or 7 minutes left in our first hour. We usually, for those of you who are just with us for the first time, we usually take a break at the top of the hour, a 5-minute break, and gives us a chance to go get a cold drink or take a walk or get some air or go to the bathroom or whatever else we might need to do. I've reached that point in my life where going to the bathroom occasionally is a good thing, and so we try to do that at the top of the hour during our programs when we're on for a full 2 hours. Lost my train of thought there for a moment. We were talking about the Pope and the criticism of the Pope in the speech in Bolivia that he delivered last week. And again, he's talking about the issues of the future of humanity itself as being on the table here. These issues, these budgets, these movements towards austerity seem always to focus on working people, on the poor, but hardly ever on the wealthy or on business. Step back for a moment into our own political debate and dialogue in this country. Our austerity program emphasizes the need to cut social programs, to cut the programs that serve the majority of the people, but not tax business, not tax the wealthy, not tax estates, reduce corporate taxes, on the theory that those are the people that create jobs. Therefore, we cannot afford to expect them to sacrifice their ability to create jobs to our current budget situations. But rather, what we have to do is give them tax breaks, because when they do what they do in our economy, the benefits of growth and jobs and opportunity and salaries and all the rest of it will trickle down to everybody else. The fact of the matter is that trickle rarely happens. One of the reported issues during the discussions in Greece that is getting very little traction is prior to the Greek vote a week ago Saturday, the no vote of 61%. Greece had put on the table its own terms of austerity. And one of the things that the Greek government proposed was that not only do we need to further reduce pensions and educational expenses, and health care costs. What we also have to do is increase taxes on the wealthy, on business. And to a fault, the international creditor market said absolutely not. This may be the most important point in the entire first hour of our program today. The creditors are not only demanding repayment, but they demand or claim the right to tell the debtor not only that you will repay, but how you will repay. You will not tax creditors. You will not tax business. You will not tax wealth. Because those are the people who will create the jobs that Greece will depend on in order to grow itself out of this financial situation that it finds itself in. When the president of Greece, Tsipras, determined to throw the issue to the people in a vote, in a referendum, which was held last Saturday, and that was the vote in which 61% of the people of Greece voted no. The president made the decision to throw it to a referendum in response to the fact that the creditors had rejected the Greek government's strategies for repaying creditors. What does that tell you? When I caught that, that jumped out at me, because what they're saying is not only must you repay, not only will we not forgive the debt or any portion of the debt, but also we're going to dictate what you must do and what you can't do in order to meet your obligations. That tells us that we are dealing with an international free market frame of mind here, which is as prominent there as it is here, as prominent here as it is there. It's driving the politics. It's driving the situations that are happening around the world. We've got to understand all of this. And it's within that context, then, if these businesses are not willing to allow Greece to take measures that it decides will best enable it to meet its debt obligations, then that suggests that what we are running into here is the voice of opposition to the Pope. Or let me put it another way. What the Pope is talking about in his demand for a new direction and for a moral dimension in some of these economic issues that are facing the world's governments today. The Pope is saying we've got to stop allowing hard economic data to drive these decisions. We've got to begin to look at the people, at people's need to work, as people need to have jobs, people's needs to have health care and education and pensions and all the rest of it. We've got to take these moral factors into consideration in these major economic decisions. That is exactly what the international creditors are denying Greece the right to do. We've just about reached the top of the hour, and I think it's probably a good time to stop right here for a 5-minute break. You are listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. I thank you for tuning in to our program. I invite you to stay tuned. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and I know Bob Kincaid usually has some wonderful music during our break, but it gives us an opportunity to reflect upon, think about some of the issues and some of the points that have been made. I'll remind you when we come back after our break, I'll repeat the phone number, the email address, the Facebook page, and invite all of you to react to some of this before we continue to pursue these issues in more and more depth. This is the Virtual Center. I want to thank you again for being with us. I invite you to stay with us. Our break will be very short. We'll stop for 5 minutes, and we'll be right back. Thank you. Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to our second hour on this Monday, the 13th day of July at the Virtual Center. We want to welcome you if you are just joining us to our program for today. If you have been with us through the first hour, I want to thank you especially for staying with us. That requires a conscious decision on your part. And I really do thank you if you've made that decision. If you put up with this for 1 hour and you're willing to take more, then I really appreciate it. And all I can say is that I will do the very best I can to make your commitment of time so very, very valuable. And we all have so little of it. The fact that you are willing to commit time to us here at the Virtual Center, I take that very seriously, and I'll do everything that I can do to make your commitment of time worthwhile. And I want you to know that. I also want you, once again, to be aware of ways that you can communicate with us. You can get on the air live right now by calling 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. That's our direct line. It will get you on the air. It's to our Head-On Radio Network studios, and we will get you on the air immediately. If you would be more comfortable communicating directly with me via email, one-on-one, I welcome that. I really do look forward to reading your reactions and your ideas and your suggestions or concerns or criticisms, whatever they might be. I do commit to the fact that I will do everything that I can do to respond to you in kind. If you take the time to send me a substantive email that is the product of serious thought and serious effort and concern on your part, I at least owe you the courtesy of a hopefully a substantive response. If I can do it. If I can't do it, I'm more than willing to own up to that and let you know, but I'll do the very best I can. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. waobrien906. O'Brien is OBRIEN 906@gmail.com. And I remind you that within the last week we have started our own Facebook page here at the Virtual Center. And so if you are a user of Facebook, then I encourage you to go to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution on Facebook and like it. And again, I'm not being facetious there. That's Facebook language, which basically puts you in communication with us via Facebook. So I invite you to do that. And I invite you to comment on some of the issues and some of the pieces that are there. In the initial stages, the first 4 or 5 days of its existence, of the page's existence, I've inserted a couple of pieces on issues of the day that I see, or I've posted a few articles that I've written recently on issues of the day. Many of them, most of them, have been published. Quite a few of them here in our local statewide newspaper here in West Virginia, the Charleston Gazette. But whatever the source, whether it's the direct call-in line or whether it's email or whether it's Facebook or however you choose, I do thank you for tuning into the Virtual Center. I remind you that we do this from 1 to 3 each Monday and each Wednesday. On Tuesdays, we start 1/2 hour later. We usually run from 1:30 to 3 on Tuesdays. I have a Rotary meeting that meets at noon, and I can't get home fast enough to get on the air at 1. And so consequently, we start at 1:30 on Tuesdays. We usually try to avoid our 5-minute break during those shorter programs on Tuesday. Oftentimes, we just run right through for the full 90 minutes. Again, I do look forward to your calls and to your reactions, and I want you to know, again, that if you do take the time, then I believe, I know, that what you have to say is something that not only me, not only I, but our other listeners would do well to hear as well. You will be treated with respect and with courtesy, I promise you. So please do not hesitate to call for fear that you might be insulted or attacked or abused or shut off or anything like that. I will not do that. Definitely not because I'd happen to disagree with your point of view. That's the whole point here. We call it an ongoing conversation. Obviously, we recognize that a conversation must have more than one person involved in order to be meaningful. I also realize that much of the material that we do present here, because of our focus on primary sources, tends to be material that a lot of our listeners haven't been exposed to before or haven't seen before. I understand that. And so basically a lot of this is delivery of information as much as anything else. What I try to do is present different sides of the issue, but I try not to argue for a particular point of view on any of it. I basically respect your ability to make up your mind once you have indicated by tuning into the virtual center that you are interested in the information, in the facts, and that you are open to having your mind, to expanding your horizons and your ideas, as I am. And I think that's the way it has to work. We were talking about the situation in Greece, and we touched upon a number of issues: the political issues, the issues about the strength of the euro, of the European Union, the realization that the Greek economy is so small in relationship to the entire organization that the economic threat that Greece poses is not nearly as dangerous as is the political threat, because there are other nations besides Greece whose economies are much more significant than is Greece's. These economies are also in debt. These economies are also beholden to creditors. And these economies also are these nations are also looking for ways to respond to the creditors and to begin to pay off the debt. And so, because these other nations, and we named a few of them, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, and I believe Italy is often included in this group, because they're watching very carefully as to what happens and how Greece is treated. And so the politics associated with this, I think, is as significant as is the economics. Then we also get into the issue of ideology, the issue of the free market, the issue of Western capitalism, of international capitalism. And we talked about some of the assumptions that drive the model of international capitalism, which is the idea of austerity and the sanctity of debt and the responsibility of debtors to make good on their debt, and the idea that a first priority must always be the payment to creditors, because it's what keeps the international economy going. If debtors ever refuse to pay the creditor, then by definition the creditor will never again be willing to lend money. And too much of that will literally stifle the free market, stifle trade, stifle commerce, stifle economic growth, cost jobs, all of it. So these governments are committed to the sanctity of debt, the sanctity of contracts, and the priority of making good on debtors. I know that there are some people who have been longtime listeners here at the Virtual Center who are probably aware that these are many of the same issues that were discussed in the United States during the period 1787-1788, when the debate was going on over the ratification of the Constitution of the United States. There's absolutely no question that the priorities of debtors and the priorities of creditors and the obligations of debtors was on the table throughout the Constitutional Convention in the summer of 1787. It was a major part of the ratification debates in a number of states, and there's no question, and we have looked at these documents, that James Madison and Alexander Hamilton and many of the others, the authors of the Federalist Papers, for example, were very, very explicit that it's the kind of situation that currently exists where debtors find it impossible to repay their debts and are looking for some sort of way out, some sort of mechanism to be excused from meeting their obligations. There's no question that Madison and Hamilton and the other supporters of the Constitution believed that by putting the so-called contract clause in Article 1 of the Constitution, talking about the sanctity, the obligation of contracts, that this was sending a message to creditors throughout the nation that their priorities would be first, because their faith in the fact that they would be repaid was the driving force in the assumptions behind the growth and the expansion of the economy that would establish this nation as a viable one. So that, this is not new stuff. But as I mentioned, just prior to our break at the top of the hour, it is very significant that when the Greek government proposed a repayment plan that included taxing business and taxing the wealthy in order to meet its obligations to creditors, representatives of creditors said absolutely not. Because economic growth and the creation of jobs is going to require the support and the faith of creditors, their ability to spend, to invest. And it's their success, their ability to invest their money in investments will reap guarantees that they will be repaid. That is the very foundation of the international capitalist system that makes this entire operation run. So we are not going to let our member nations, our governments, local governments, if you will, strangle economic growth by imposing taxes, higher taxes on business and investors. In reality, then, the creditors in the Greek situation are not only demanding repayment, but they also are demanding the right to dictate the methods that Greece uses in order to make those payments. In other words, we'll tell you what you can do and what you can't do in order to repay us. And if you do not agree to those terms, you will be in default. Your economy will be in free fall. And the fact that after an all-night session an agreement was reached early this morning, suggests that the Greek government was required to fold, to cave in order to preserve not only the nation that the government represented, but in order to preserve its status as the elected government of Greece. There's no question that if the creditors cut the strings and allowed Greece to go down the tubes, as it were, then the Greek government would fall. In fact, many people who have written on this matter make the point that the real issue here, the real referendum that the people voted on, was not the economics involved. It was on the future of the government itself. That if the people in the referendum had voted yes, we will agree to the terms of the European creditors, then that would effectively be a vote of no confidence in their own government. But by voting 61% no, then what the Greek people did was express their faith in their own government to represent them. But now what we see a week later is that after a week of back and forth negotiations, and it went into the night and into the early morning, it appears, although we don't know the details yet, that the Greek government was forced to give in. What we're seeing here is a form of international capitalist hardball, as it were, that I think is very important. Let me say, just briefly, and this won't take a second, but last week, when this crisis first broke, the first couple of days, I took on the issue and submitted a letter, an op-ed piece to our local paper here in southern West Virginia, the Beckley Register Herald, in which I tried to alert the people of this community as to the significance of what was happening in Greece. But let me tell you that this was written last Monday. It appeared in the paper on, I believe, Wednesday of last week, the 8th. So a lot's happened since then. But let me just share with you what my thoughts were as of last Monday when I wrote this. And I entitled this piece, When the Greeks Applaud Us. And this was taken right after Greece voted 61% no to the terms. And that's where this piece begins. The unequivocal no that the Greek people delivered to European creditors and their political allies on Sunday stands in bold relief to the cynicism and resignation to hopelessness that we see too often here in America. Even after so many centuries, it appears that the Greeks have not abandoned at all their determination to keep teaching us, learning by doing, Aristotle would say. 2 centuries ago, Lord Byron reported to Lady Melbourne, 1813, that like now, quote, "'tis said indifference marks the present time," unquote, in British politics. Again, as an aside, what I'm basically saying there is Lord Byron wrote 2 centuries ago about British politics, that there seemed to be a general sense of indifference on the part of the British people 2 centuries ago. The same kind of indifference that I've referred to here. Lord Byron followed with rhyme that was part explanation, part lament, even more insight. Quote, "A king who can't, a prince of Wales who don't, patriots who shan't, and ministers who won't. What matters who are in or out of place? The mad, the bad, the useless, or the base?" So often we hear it said, the actors change, but the play stays the same. Byron knew that he was looking at more than indifference, much more. "'Tis said," he said. Americans, too, seek ways to register their discontent. Their faith in their Congress has dipped below 10%. That's something. Or is it? Perhaps, like Lord Byron, America's founders knew more than they were willing to give them credit for, than we've been willing to give them credit for. James Madison, for example, warned that, quote, "a people who mean to be their own governors must exercise the power which knowledge gives. If people are going to govern themselves, they must have access to information that will lead to knowledge so that the people can determine wisely." A people who mean to be their own governors, Madison said, must exercise the power which knowledge gives. What kind of power? What kind of knowledge would produce it? Madison must have known that governments that hide information or muddy it up in ways that intended to conflict and confuse their own people are disrespecting citizens wanting to be their own governors, even those content to just live here. One has to wonder, how would Madison and the others react today when a president who bailed out big banks and Wall Street investors with the people's money is alleged by some of those same people to be a socialist? Would he see today's America as a nation of patriots who shan't, in the face of ministers who won't? Or something quite a bit worse? Clearly, he'd see a serious disconnect in the people's painful journey to turn information they know into true knowledge they can use. When they finally do, and determined to do something about it, perhaps the people of Greece will applaud us. Obviously, my goal there was to make the point that this situation affects all of us. It was just beginning to get serious attention then around the world. But the fact is, it's an issue that directly involves all of us. And of course, my thinking was that when you think of the debt that we in the West owe Greece, and I go back to the ancients, to the architecture and the art and the sculpture and the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle and Aristophanes and Sophocles, and on and on and on, you begin to see that this has serious ramifications far beyond the issues of repaying debt. One of the things I thought we ought to do here as we pursue this issue is to hear from some of the people on the ground, namely the people of Greece. Let me share a couple of quotations from Greek citizens who are living through this. Quote, "Just imagine if we voted yes," Eleni said. "They've dug our grave for us. Do they want us to pull the slabs over our heads? They've put the guns to our temples, and now they're waiting for us to pull the trigger." Here's another quote. This gentleman is in his 80s. "We won't be saved by yes or no. It'll be bad either way. But one thing will change. they'll know they don't have our agreement for what they're doing to us. The government may have made mistakes, but the position of the Europeans has been cruel, oppressive, humiliating, shockingly inhuman. They'll get their money, but they have to realize we need time to recover first. This is a young couple, Tina and Thanos, who have 2 small boys, who came to the polls to cast their ballot in Greece. Thanos is unemployed. Tina works for a drug company that hasn't been paid for months. Dinner comes to them in Tupperware boxes from her parents who are retired. Quote, "Whether it's no or yes, it'll be the same for us," Tina said. "We're not hardcore, but maybe it would be better leaving the euro and starting again. Don't get me wrong, I want Europe, but not this Europe." Unquote. Here's another. This is a suburb called Psychiko, one of the few precincts in Greece where the majority voted yes, voted to give in to the terms. One of the people who came to the polls in this suburb, in this community, who voted no, was trying to explain why so many of his neighbors were voting yes. His answer? They've all taken their money out of the country. That's why they're happy. And here's another from an independent financial consultant about the Greek government and about the way it's representing the people in these negotiations. The right way to negotiate, Jonas said, is not in the left's culture. And of course he's making reference there to the fact that the Greek government is a leftist government. It is a government that questions the legitimacy of the economic system that Greece finds itself trapped in. It stands to reason that there is reason why the creditor nations of Europe would like to see the Greek government fall, since it is a leftist government that is critical of the entire operation. I call your attention to 1973. I don't know how many of you can remember. I do. 1973. When a leftist government was elected in Chile under the head of Salvador Allende. And this created a real problem for a lot of people here in the United States. Because for the first time, we had a leftist government in the Western Hemisphere that was elected by the people. It's one thing if it's a military coup and you can take measures to bring the government down. But it becomes very difficult to take measures against a government that has been elected by the people and still claim that you are the world's leading democracy. But lo and behold, as we know, public demonstrations and food lines and the closing of banks and all the rest of it occurred in Chile. And mysteriously during the uprising, Salvador Allende was shot. Obviously, we don't know who did it. But what we do know is that the United States government, specifically the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, was directly and intricately involved in the situation in Chile that brought down the Allende government. There's absolutely no question that there is a priority or a preference on the part of Western nations in the Eurozone to see the government of Tsipras, the president, fall. A yes vote would have done that. A no vote made it very difficult. But after a week of haggling, it appears that the big guys won out. Since we don't know what would have happened to the Greek government with a yes vote, it seems to me we're kind of in the dark. We're speculating here because we're guessing what might have happened, but we really don't know. But these are some of the quotations. And the one I was reading is this one from Jonas about the negotiations. The right way to negotiate, he said, is not in the left's culture. The government will fall and others will take its place who can negotiate properly, not with bullying and blackmail. The only other left like the Greek left in the world is in North Korea. They've created an anti-European climate that we never had in Greece. Their policy is to blame Europe for everything. And they're sowing discord like in the Civil War. Whoever isn't with them is a collaborator, unquote. Basically then, this suggests that those people that were lobbying for a yes vote in the referendum believed that the basis of their campaign ought to be a yes vote in order to bring down the leftist government of Cyprus. Of President Tsipras. It's obvious from these quotes that there's a class character or class aspect to the situation in Greece. The working people and the poor are advocating the no. The well-to-do and business are advocating the yes. They are the ones that want the government to fall. Here's another quote. Greece doesn't exist anymore. We're lost. A retired teacher said. The Greece inside us has collapsed. To vote yes meant having some faith in an international order where rational actors make decisions on the basis of both self-interest and collective responsibility. To vote no meant acknowledging the end of that comforting fantasy and making a leap of faith into the unknown, whether or not you could trust this government to see you through. History is moving much too fast to tell. One of the most interesting pieces that I picked up on this issue is a piece that John Nichols wrote in The Nation, which is a leftist publication here in the United States. The Nation has been around since the 1850s, many of you know, on Bernie Sanders. Because when this thing first started, Bernie Sanders made the statement, quote, I applaud the people of Greece. He said, I applaud the people of Greece for saying no to more austerity. For more austerity for the poor and the children, the sick and the elderly. In a world of massive wealth and income inequality, Europe must support Greece's efforts to build an economy which creates more jobs and income, not more unemployment and suffering. Dan Cantor, who is the national director of the Working Families Movement here in the United States, said the following: Greece, the birthplace of democracy, is making a simple request. Let our people vote on this proposal. We can't allow these global finance titans to blackmail Greece's democracy with their wealth. The U.S. controls the most votes on the board of the International Monetary Fund and can use its influence to soften negotiations with Greece. John Nichols also cites a statement from President Obama in an interview with CNN's Fareed Zakaria in February. Quote, "You cannot keep on squeezing countries that are in the midst of depression. At some point, there has to be a growth strategy in order for them to pay off their debts and eliminate some of their deficits." President Obama said that. At the time then, and beside this paragraph of this Nation article by John Nichols, I have written "wow" in the margin. Because here's the issue of what's permissible and what's not permissible. Quote, "In an age of corporate globalization and immense pressure on nations to accept austerity policies, the fight over Greece's future has raised fundamental questions about the state of democracy itself. Chief among these is the question of whether the people of a sovereign state should have a say over their own future, or whether, because of an economic or trade relationship with larger and more powerful countries, that say must be ceded to distant traders and bankers. For us, democracy is non-negotiable," explained Tsipras, the leader of the Syriza government that has sought to free Greece from the imposed austerity. The bankers and the bureaucrats resisted the efforts of Tsipras and his government to renegotiate Greece's relationship with the European Union in order to free up the country's hobbled economy and to restore a safety net there. Rather than recognize the failure of austerity, the EU, the European Union, kept imposing final offers for more and more austerity. Demands for a continuation of failed policies that have hobbled Greece's economy, impoverished the country's citizens. The unemployment rate in Greece exceeds 25%. John Nichols reports that the Greeks are attempting to democratize economic decision-making. And he points out that this will happen when citizens make clear that they no longer stand for cuts on working families in order to preserve the wealth of billionaires and the authority of central banks. So that's the issue. It seems to me that's the class issue. So there's a political issue, an economic issue, an ideological issue, a class issue. All of these things are happening in order to get a handle on and try to understand what's going on there. And at the same time, those very same debates are going on here in the United States. Most of us are either indifferent or unaware of some of these things that are going on. The Nobel economist Joseph Stiglitz weighed into this Greek situation as well. Joseph Stiglitz said, and I have his book right here on my bookshelf. The Price of Inequality is the most recent book that Stiglitz wrote. Stiglitz says the rising crescendo of bickering and acrimony within Europe might seem to outsiders to be the inevitable result of the bitter endgame playing out between Greece and its creditors. In fact, European leaders are finally beginning to reveal the true nature of the ongoing debt dispute. And the answer is not pleasant. It's about power and democracy, much more than money and economics. He goes on to explain, we should be clear, almost none of the huge amount of money loaned to Greece has actually gone there. It has gone to pay out private sector creditors, including German and French banks. Greece has gotten but a pittance. It has paid a high price to preserve these countries' banking systems. The IMF and the other official creditors do not need the money that is being demanded. Under the business-as-usual scenario, the money received would most likely just be lent out again to Greece. But again, it's not about money. It's about deadlines. It's about power. It's about what you can do and what you can't do to meet your obligations. It's about buying into and preserving the system under which this debt occurred. To step away, forgive the debt, come up with a plan that would relieve the pressure on Greece, would preserve its government, it would legitimize the leftist nature of its government, and it would send the wrong message to other debtor nations within the euro, like Portugal, like Spain, like Ireland, like Italy. For all of those reasons, then, clearly it's become necessary to hold Greece's feet to the fire. This is Cantor, Dan Cantor, the National Director of the Working Families Movement that we quoted before. And I want to share this particular quote with you. Quote, the financial and political titans of the world would like us to believe that austerity is simply the better medicine we must accept in order to generate economic growth. But it's not medicine at all, it's poison. It's smothering working people and threatening democracy itself. The collapse of Greece's economy and the political blackmail of the Greek people is a case study in unchecked austerity politics. He says that it is absolutely right to urge President Obama and American officials to press for a just and democratic solution to the crisis in Greece. I would suggest then that there we have it. The class nature of this, the political nature of this, the long-term ramifications of this. If you'll permit me, I'd like to go. We only have about 10 minutes left in today's program. Now that we've heard these quotes, we've heard from the Greek people, we heard from commentators, left and right, on the credibility of debt, on the nature of capitalism, it seemed to me that as we move toward the end of our time together today, recognizing that we can pick up on this theme and develop it further in tomorrow's program, that, for those of you who are not familiar with the virtual center, that's one of the beauties of being able to be here 3 days a week. Is the time, we do not allow the time to dictate what we do or how well we do it, very honestly. I'd like to go back to the Pope's encyclical. His encyclical called Praise Be to You. Specifically, the section in the Pope's encyclical about banks, about the international financial system in the context of his effort to defend climate and defend the environment. This is directly from the Pope's encyclical. Today, in view of the common good, there is urgent need for politics and economics to enter into a frank dialogue in the service of life, especially human life. Saving banks at any cost, making the public pay the price, foregoing a firm commitment to reviewing and reforming the entire system, only reaffirms the absolute power of a financial system, a power which has no future and will only give rise to new crises after a slow, costly, and only apparent recovery. The financial crisis of 2007-2008 provided an opportunity to develop a new economy, more attentive to ethical principles, and new ways of regulating speculative financial practices and virtual wealth. But the response to the crisis did not include rethinking the outdated criteria which continue to rule the world. A strategy for real change calls for rethinking processes in their entirety, for it is not enough to include a few superficial ecological considerations while failing to question the logic which underlies present-day culture. I think we have to take the Pope's encyclical as he wrote it, rethinking the outdated criteria which continue to rule the world. It seems to me, says something about what the Pope is saying to us. It appears that he's talking directly to the European creditors who are engaged in negotiations with Greece. But given the news that they have reached a tentative agreement of sorts, apparently these people have been too busy negotiating and haven't listened or been able to listen to the Pope. The significance of the Pope's encyclical, I would suggest to you, becomes clearer and clearer as the situation in Greece goes on, and as the negotiations go on. I think, and again, we're at 54 minutes after the hour, so we're in the wind-up stage here of about 4 minutes before we end our broadcast day. I think that the significance of what is happening in the Greek financial crisis is a case study, if we will but look at it, at what the entire world is going to face eventually. We have talked about work. We have talked about the lack of work. We have talked about the psychology of work as it defines self-esteem and the human being's self-worth. The Pope has talked in the encyclical about the moral considerations that need to be on the table when these kinds of decisions are reached. You can't continue to automate and automate, to displace and displace, to render useless more and more people by requiring higher and higher, more sophisticated skills in a job market which is leaving the people of the world behind. The result is that a very few people who are able to handle what we've called over and over again the technological revolution, if you will, it becomes impossible for our education system to meet the skill obligations and the educational responsibilities for students by turning out people with the skills necessary in the modern global economic world. The fact of the matter is the skill demands become so sophisticated that fewer and fewer people can meet them. Not only that, but it's not clear to the people for whom it must be clear how to prepare students for this new world. We don't know how to educate our people to handle this. What we are finding out is that more and more of them can't do it. So the fact of the matter is, what do we do with these people? Do we raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour? Do we go along with the trend to turn full-time employment with benefits into part-time jobs? Do we take on a totally socialist idea and guarantee people a minimum income with the idea that if they really want to work for success and be more successful than the minimum, they can educate themselves and work for it, but if they don't, we'll guarantee them a minimum basis. Food on the table, a roof over their heads, health care. In other words, what do we do with a population that our economic, technological advances continue to render more and more useless? It seems to me that the answer to those questions require that we sit down and reflect carefully on what it is we're doing and why we're doing it and whether in fact there are alternative ways to do it. I think all of that is on the table during these negotiations in Greece. Tomorrow here at the Virtual Center, I remind you that we will be beginning our broadcast 1/2 hour later than today, 1:30 Eastern Daylight Time. And depending on the time zone you're in, of course, the time changes will be appropriate. But it'll be 1/2 hour later than today. And then Wednesday, we'll be back at our regular time for a full 2 hours. What I'd like to do tomorrow is like to pick up on this theme and pursue it a little bit more. I'd like to look at the entire issue of investment and capital and its role in economic development. I will tell you ahead of time, this is very sophisticated stuff. I'm not sure I understand all of it, but I'm going to give it a try. I want to thank you for tuning in to this edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. I want everyone to have a wonderful day. Enjoy your evening. Be safe, because in some parts of the country there's some pretty serious weather out there, at least forecasted. Please be safe. We'd like to have you back with us again tomorrow. This is Bill O'Brien. Thank you so very, very much for listening. Have a good day.